Number 10. Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger originally started appearing in a comic strip and would later receive his own comic book series in 1948, which went for over 100 issues. Before he was even in comics though, Lone Ranger was a superhero recognized for his radio show, which debuted in the early 1930s. The first few comics consist of compilations of his comic strips, but new stories began with Lone Ranger starting with issue 38, which saw Paul S. Newman writing and Tom Gill on art. The Lone Ranger was known as a mysterious masked Texan Ranger who would fight bandits and outlaws in the Wild West of America, with his loyal pal Tonto and his trusty steed Silver. Hi-ho Silver away! Number 9. Tonto. You didn't think I was going to talk about Lone Ranger and just leave Tonto out of this list, did you? Tonto was originally shown as Lone Ranger's native partner and was part of the Comanche tribe originally. Some may think of him as just a sidekick, but as time progressed his character tended to be more presented as an equal and partner to the Lone Ranger rather than just a sidekick. He got his own comic book spin-off series in the 50s titled The Lone Ranger's Companion Tonto, and was often depicted as being witty and sarcastic, even going on to mock other less favorable portrayals of himself in pop culture that made him seem more savage. I like when heroic characters are self-aware and sassy like that. I feel it. Deadpool, She-Hulk, Tonto. Keep being sassy, keep being witty. Number 8. Green Lantern. Before Hal Jordan or Guy Gardner, there was Alan Scott. He was the first Green Lantern and was created by Mart Nodell, making his comic book debut in All-American Comics issue 16. When this first Green Lantern made his appearance, he probably seemed to be pretty cool, I'm sure. This was way back when the Green Lantern was still an actual lantern, by the way. It's just this lantern he was carrying around. But in retrospect, Alan Scott is known as being one of the silliest Green Lanterns, because he has one of the strangest weaknesses in comic book history. Wood. While there definitely wouldn't be openly gay superheroes for some time yet since he was introduced in 1940, I like to think the fact that he is helpless against wood might pose a double or symbolic meaning. I'll just let you ponder what you will about that. But that's just me. Either way, the weakness is a hilarious one to see in comics, just villains beating him with wooden clubs and baseball bats, and it would later be fully explained and made semi-logical later on, but still, it's ridiculous. And I love it. Number 7. Black Panther. The leader of Wakanda made his first comic book debut appearance in Fantastic Four issue 52 in 1966. He is often credited with being the first black superhero to appear in comics. The only sad thing is that it took us that long to get one. The 60s! Such a long time in comics, so long. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The first story involving him in the pages of Fantastic Four Volume 1 are pretty hilarious and great. If you haven't read them, you kind of should. They're interesting. Black Panther invites the Fantastic Four to Wakanda. Naive as they are, they accept. But what they don't know is that Black Panther longs to fight them. Of course, while the comic originally seems to be spinning Black Panther as a villain, it is later revealed that he only wanted to test them, and the fighting was merely to prove their merit as he needs their help. In the next issue, issue 53, we learn more about his backstory and why he sought out the Fantastic Four. We are also introduced even more to the land of Wakanda with its unique combination of new age tech and tradition, old and new. So there you have it. Number 6. Superman. Superman is that hero that you usually think of when someone asks who the oldest superhero is during a trivia night. And honestly, I'm sure it's an acceptable answer by most trivia standards. But not here. Not here. Here we go further. Superman is widely thought of as being one of the oldest, the original American comic book superhero. But seeing as how he is number 6 on this list, I think us mega nerds would likely know otherwise. Still, he came out in 1938 and first debuted in Action Comics number 1. And honestly, if you read his original appearance, it's easy to see what all the hullabaloo is about. It's basically a piece created to show off and introduce just how unstoppable Superman is. In fact, Superman would continue to be presented as near invincible until the 80s, acquiring more and more powers with each appearance. And then we had to fix that. We had to tweak that because it's too much power. Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Number 5. Sheena. Queen of the Jungle. You might be wondering just where Wonder Woman is on this list, but Sheena actually predates Wonder Woman, and her own self-titled series even predates Wonder Woman's by a few months. She was originally published by Fiction Comics and was known as Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Most 1930s Queen of the Jungle I have ever seen, but yet. Sheena's abilities included super strength and agility, and the ability to communicate with animals. She made her first appearance in WAG Comics issue number 1, and her self-titled series came out in early 1942, just a few months before Wonder Woman. Only a few months. So close, so close! Number 4. Kazar. Khazar is known as being one of the first Marvel superheroes. Can you guess who the other one is? Let me know in the comments. But there are actually two Khazars. The one I'm referring to here is David Rand. He appeared in Marvel before they were even known as Marvel back when they were Timely Comics in 1936. Khazar shared many similarities with Tarzan and was very passionate about protecting the surrounding wildlife and animals where he grew up. He also fought against Germany with the Allies in World War II, fun fact. In fact, the last story we have of him shows him setting out to provide more wartime aid. The other Khazar we would meet later in the 60s was known as Kevin Reginald, and was the son of the man who discovered Savage Land. Both Khazars also appear to be English. They had an English heritage anyways. Interesting. Number 3. The Phantom. The Phantom originated in comic strip form where so many superheroes were originally born. He was created by Lee Falk. The Phantom actually introduced the idea of a costumed adventurer to American comic books. Before that, we didn't really have people in like tight spandex running around. While the Phantom, aka Kit Walker, found popularity in comic strips in the US, his comics didn't quite shine so bright. Internationally, however, the character seemed to do much better, becoming a hit in Australia, Sweden, and Papua New Guinea. He also was originally from a fictional country in Africa, so no wonder he did well in Papua New Guinea. I feel like they were like, I can see some similarities here. Number 2. Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers first appeared in a comic strip. He is a hero who comes from a world of sci-fi set in the future of the 2400s. 24,000s? 2400s, yeah, 2400s. Depending on what medium or comic you're reading, the last 2 digits of that year are also apt to change for his story. He made his comic strip debut as Buck, but the character was originally named Anthony Rogers in the novel that inspired the comics, Armageddon 2419 AD, written by Philip Francis Nolan. The story follows the adventures of a young man who is frozen for almost 500 years in suspended animation before waking up in the future and rediscovering the world he once knew, in a time that he is less familiar with. Honestly, if you aren't aware of Buck Rogers, but you are a fan of cosmic superheroes or sci-fi and weird space adventures, I highly recommend you check this classic out. Also, if you just like some time travel-y stuff. Who doesn't like time travel-y stuff? Everyone is like me, I hate it, but there's a few of us I know that like it. Number 1. Spring-Heeled Jack. Spring-Heeled Jack was originally a character in English folklore and urban legends. His being was reportedly cited all over Great Britain in the 1830s, and the stories involving him inspired writers to use him as a character in both a play and in Penny Dreadful novels, which were short serials, the original comic books really of the time. He has since seen other comic book series dedicated to him as time has progressed. Spring-Heeled Jack was originally described as a gentlemanly looking demon, and later described as looking like the devil himself, complete with horns. He was often known for breathing fire. Whoa, scary stuff. While his character was originally posed as a villain, he later developed into a misunderstood hero, a nobleman who sought to steal from the rich and give to the poor, complete with his own gadgets to help him perform his noble feats. Kinda like Robin Hood meets Batman. It's kinda what he was doing. Meets a guy that looks like a demon. Just combine all those, you got Spring-Heeled Jack. Number 10. Hero for Hire / Power Man. That's right, while Black Panther was one of the first superheroes of color to appear in comics, Luke Cage's Power Man would actually beat him when it came to having his own comic series. This series was originally titled Hero for Hire, but the name would later be changed starting with issue 17 to Power Man. The first issue of Hero for Hire came out in June of 1971, and Black Panther wouldn't get his own series until 1977. I know, strange, right? The name for Luke Cage's series would change one more time starting with issue number 50, becoming Power Man and Iron Fist. That name would stick with the series from issue 86 till its end in issue number 125. Number 9. The Amazing Spider-Man. When many people think of Marvel Comics, this is often the hero they think of first. The first volume of Amazing Spider-Man would see its very first issue come out in March of 1963, and the first issue was very much an origin story, one that we'd become all too familiar with in the animated series and films to follow about everyone's favorite Spidey-themed hero, Peter Parker's Spider-Man. The series would be a long-standing one and would produce hundreds of issues, and although it has been relaunched, the story of Peter Parker continues to be one that comic book fans everywhere have become obsessed with, making Spider-Man one of the biggest superheroes, especially one of the biggest superheroes to come out of Marvel Comics. Number 8. Fantastic Four. The Human Torch was actually the first character to appear from the Fantastic Four in Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939. Sort of anyways. Marvel Comics was an anthology magazine comprised of various heroes' adventure shorts. I know, I said no anthologies, but I think this is a pretty cool fact. The Human Torch that actually first appeared in Marvel Comics was actually Jim Hammond. Hammond would later be reinvented in the Fantastic Four team as Johnny Storm, Sue's brother, so the character, while different, is even older than the Fantastic Four comics itself. which is still pretty old, although granted that Human Torch wasn't obviously the same as the Human Torch that we have now. The Fantastic Four series started in 1961 with issue 1, which like Spider-Man's start was also an origin story. Watch out for those cosmic rays, or maybe don't if you want superpowers. Number 7. The Flash. Starting us off with Barry Allen's Flash, this series had hundreds of issues as well, though not quite as many as the Amazing Spider-Man series. It all started in March of 1959 with issue 105. While that might seem like an odd number to start on, it was because the series was picked up by DC Comics after All American Publications cancelled its predecessor, a series known as Flash Comics, which featured predominantly the adventures of the Flash and Hawkman. DC Comics actually was kind of once All American Publications. DC was the phoenix that rose out of the ashes of a few different comic book publishers who came together to create DC, of which All American was one. And then later, that original Flash 2 from Flash Comics, Jay Garrick, would also become part of our continuity. Fun fact. Jay Garrick was one of the few Flashes that actually got to retire, post to die, or go back into the Speed Force, or any of that fun stuff. Number 6. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman would get her own series in 1942, shortly after her appearance in All-Star Comics issue number 8. The first issue even introduced a female associate editor of the magazine, Alice Marble. Marble was known as an acclaimed tennis player. While her time on the DC staff editorial board was brief, she was also a self-proclaimed fan of Wonder Woman, who was responsible during her time with DC for the Wonder Woman of History feature in the comic, which retold the stories of real-life famous historical women. Wonder Woman's first story involved her saving Steve Trevor, and introduced us to the world of the Amazons. Apparently, Amazons liked riding kangaroos around originally. Did you know that? At least they look like kangaroos, I don't know. Giant kangaroos, we ride them in combat. I wonder when horses became a thing in these comics. I need to read more old Wonder Woman, because it seems like a time. Number 5. Green Lantern. This comic was originally published by National Periodical Publications, who, as we know now, would later become one of the companies that would amalgamate into DC Comics. The series would run for 38 issues, and would introduce the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. One of my favorites to bring up because I get to talk about his weakness to wood. In this first issue, we would discover how Alan got his powers from both the Green Lantern ring and an actual Green Lantern, which was created by an old Chinese lamp maker from molten green space metal that had crashed to Earth via meteor. This original series really put the lantern in Green Lantern. It's not even a funny joke, it's just really bad. You're welcome. Number 4. Captain Marvel Adventures. Captain Marvel Adventures was the spin-off from Whiz Comics, an anthology series that featured the ever-popular Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel Adventures was the original series for the hero, produced by Fawcett Publications. Alright, let's get into the craziness of Fawcett, here we go. Fawcett would end up cancelling the series and all other superhero series eventually as a result of the lawsuit filed against them in regards to Captain Marvel's similarity to Superman, who had belonged to National Periodical Publications at the time the lawsuit was filed in the 1940s. Still, Captain Marvel Adventures would go on to have 150 issues before it was cancelled in the 1950s. National Periodical Publication would later evolve and merge into the famous comic book publisher that we know today as DC Comics. And as Fawcett was closing up shop, DC would end up picking up the rights for Captain Marvel, aka Billy Batson, in the 1970s. Captain Marvel under DC would eventually evolve to become Shazam, originally the name of the magician who gave Billy his powers in his origin story in Whiz Comics. Although later that magician would have a different name, have no name, all sorts of crazy stuff. The name change happened after Marvel Comics sued DC for rights to the name in regards to their own separate Captain Marvel, who first appeared in the Marvel Superhero series in 1967. Oh, comic book characters and lawsuits. Woo! I hope that clarified some of that crazy lawsuit stuff for you, or made it more confusing. Either way, I hope you learned something. Number 3. Captain America Comics. Captain America was one of the first Marvel heroes to get his own series. Captain America Comics was the original name of the series, and its first issue came out in March of 1941. Unsurprisingly, the cover features Cap punching Hitler in the face, pretty much establishing what kind of hero Steve Rogers would be from day one. The kind of guy that likes to punch Nazis in the face. That's his thing. That was his thing anyways. Then he got frozen in some ice, then he woke up, did some other stuff. You know how it goes. Number 2. Batman. After making his first appearance in the Detective Comics series in issue 27, Batman would shortly after get his own series and go on to be one of the most iconic heroes in comic book history, and obviously one of my favorites. The first issue of Batman came out in March of 1940. It featured an origin story and introduced us to Batman characters who would go on to become some of the most famous, including Robin, James Gordon, Joe Chill, Hugo Strange, Catwoman, and Batman's one true supervillain, the Joker. Number 1. Superman. Superman first appeared in the anthology series Action Comics, and like Batman, he would soon after get a series to call his own. Superman Volume 1 Issue 1 would come out in June of 1939, almost a full year before his future BFF and fellow JLA member Batman. Superman's first issue was the typical origin story fare, but as soon as issue 2, we would also find ourselves introduced to some of Superman's mainstays, mostly in the way of supporting characters. In issue 2, we would meet both Superman's young pal Jimmy Olsen and his future girlfriend slash wife slash baby mama Lois Lane. Slash sometimes she's superwoman herself. That's also happened. Oh, Lois Lane. She's a pretty cool lady.
Number 10. Wolverine. Yes, Wolverine has been a member of the Avengers, but at this point, I mean, who hasn't? Between honorary membership and various teams, they've accepted many people. While Wolverine was a full-fledged member, he was one of the new Avengers who joined in 2005, and from there on in would find some form of affiliation, say such as with the Savage Avengers. Wolverine, aka James Howlett, is quite long-lived. He made it onto the list of oldest mutants as well. Wolverine was allegedly born in 1832 or 1886, depending upon which comic you're reading, because Wolverine's history shifts to the point that it's actually a bit of a joke. Some other publications clock him at over 200. The point is, he's old. He's older than Cap. So we have his mutant abilities to thank for this. They allow him to age at a slower pace than most people, thanks to his healing factor. His cells regenerate at a much faster rate, keeping them younger and healthier than the natural slow march of time. Number 9. Captain America. Starting off with one of the younger members on the list, Captain America. Captain America's age comes from the time that he spent frozen in ice, so he is physically still pretty young, but if you count all the frozen years, he's over 100 years old. And yes, that counts. Kinda like being born on a leap year, but not really. How old are you? Captain America is one of the earliest members of the Avengers, but not one of the founders. No, the group was already founded when he was located frozen in ice, so he was a new recruit, but he became such a presence that he's often associated with the founding, and as a leader of the team. So Cap enjoys a position of high standing, and you can always pull out some he's old jokes in case you need or want them, which the MCU did in abundance. Capsicle ahoy! Number 8. The Sentry. The Sentry is Robert Reynolds, and based on his backstory, he is older than the rest of the Avengers. He is positioned as a Superman-style hero for Marvel, appearing and launching a golden era in a way that happened for DC but not for Marvel, because Marvel wasn't Marvel until the 60s. Before that, they were Timely and Atlas. Hence, this Sentry was there before the rise of the Age of Heroes such as Cap and Namor, who were the Golden Age heroes of Marvel, and he was firmly established by the Renaissance, aka the time of the Fantastic Four, based upon this retroactive canon. The Sentry seemingly doesn't age because of the serum that was the catalyst for him receiving his powers, which also triggered a photosynthetic response that causes him to not only absorb solar energy, but moved his molecules a tenth of a second ahead in time, which causes him to be immensely powerful for reasons. The Sentry, once he was established in canon, earns a place as one of the oldest Avengers. He joined the team in the New Avengers in 2005. Number 7. Namor. Why yes, the Submariner, Imperious Rex, has been on the Avengers. He joined in the 1980s in issue 262. Good old Namor Mackenzie. Once you know that's his name, you can't stop saying it. Namor also made our oldest mutants list, because for a time he was called the First Mutant, a title he has since lost, as he is not really a mutant at all, but instead a hybrid. Namor was born around 1916 as a way to account for him being a Golden Age hero, but still around the Silver Age, and Modern Age. He ages slowly. As mentioned, he was one of the Golden Age heroes for Marvel, and he made that transference over in the Renaissance when he was reintroduced in the Fantastic Four. But of course, the old continuity was still canon as well, so he is over 100 years old. And he's not on like the reputable Avengers team all the time, he gets to be on the Illuminati too, and cause the Skrull invasion. Number 6. Conan the Barbarian. Conan is a recent addition to the Savage Avengers in 2019, and has been there since the first issue. 10,000 BC, that is the era when Conan is supposed to be taking place during a fictional era, but the Avengers is a fictional team, so hey, it counts. Conan was transported forward in time by a spell to be on this team of Avengers, and some would say that doesn't count, but here on Top 10 Nerd, that makes him ancient. This isn't the only time Conan has been brought forward in the Marvel canon either. It usually happens in what if stories. There's a story where he becomes a pimp, kinda. So you can have those fun culture shock moments. I mean, if him being a pimp is fun. Venom is also on this team of Avengers too. He's old. Well, the symbiote is. Number 5. STARFOX. STARFOX is a member of the Eternals, a race who is an offshoot of the evolutionary process that would create life on Earth. The Eternals are an extremely long-lived race who are viewed essentially as immortal. StarFox is the brother of Thanos, and he was recruited to the Avengers in the 1980s. His first appearance as a member was in issue 243, but he was a member in training since issue 232. Eros, aka StarFox, would be on the team without much fanfare until he was accused of sexual assault. Now, we've talked about this many times in this channel, and some of you are like, why do you keep bringing it up? Well, it's cause unless you were really tracking StarFox, like you're a big StarFox fan, that is the most significant thing to happen to him in many people's minds. And for some, that arc, he's never really recovered from it. Number 4. Gilgamesh, the Forgotten One. Let's continue on down this path of Eternals. He got to be on the Avengers at a time when the roster was nearly empty. He joined in Avengers issue number 300 in 1989. It was at this point that he properly took on the name Gilgamesh and updated his costume. He then also took the mantle of Monster Hunter. He would assist them firstly until it appeared to his death in 391, and then he would officially leave when his essence was bound to Olympus. Some people afraid he was on the team, which works because of his name, the Forgotten One. Number 3. Sersi. Sersi joined the Avengers in issue 314 in 1990. Captain America had already met Sersi a couple of times, once through time travel and then because she would become friends with some of the Avengers, as Sersi grew quite attached to her time as a human during the time when the Eternals had lost their memory. He would ask her for her help and she would eagerly agree because she had a crush on Cap and was often seen flirting with him. It was after she had helped out the Avengers that she would be asked to join. This was again during their quest for members, as she was an ideal choice as she had already worked with them. She would prove to be a great asset to the team, but Cap would consistently find himself embarrassed by her flirting with him. However, over time, she would become more and more aggressive. Sersi, like Gilgamesh and StarFox, is an Eternal. So, long-lived. It's part of the pedigree. She is said to have been born during the Ice Age. Number 2. Thor, the God of Thunder, currently the Herald of Thunder at the time of this recording. He is of course one of the Asgardian gods. Thor has lived for millennia, long enough to become ensconced in myth. He is at least as old as man, probably older. The Asgardians live in another realm and age much slower than humans, not only as a result of their physiology, but as a result of the golden apples of Idun they eat to prolong their lives. He would end up joining the Avengers after he was cast to Earth by his father Odin. For a time he had a human form as well, that of Donald Blake. Despite this, he is one of the founding members of the Avengers as one of the key players in Marvel's Renaissance, at the start of the Silver Age. Number 1. Valkyrie. Valkyrie joined the team during what's called the Heroic Age of Recruits, and first appeared as an Avenger in Secret Avengers Volume 1 in 2010. It was revealed to be the original Brunhild, which it matters. Valkyrie is of course based off of the Valkyries of Norse mythology, and firmly planted within Thor's universe. Brunhild is seemingly older than Thor, as she was selected for Valhalla by Odin before the Thunder God makes his appearance. This makes her one of the oldest Avengers. She also has a pretty confusing history involving multiple identities, some time being taken over by the Enchantress, being split into multiple people, and the like.
Number 10. Venom. Venom would technically make its first appearance in issue 252 of volume 1 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, but it wouldn't be until almost 50 issues later in issue 299 that the suit would develop a mind of its own, or well, bind its own mind with that of Eddie Brock's mind, and be introduced to us again as Venom. Once Eddie had got his hands on the suit, he began to plot sweet revenge on Peter Parker. But during his first appearance, Peter, who was also rocking a black and white suit at the time, albeit not the symbiotic one, I know, confusing, was not at home, so instead Venom ran into MJ in her and Peter's apartment, scaring her senseless. Eddie would go on to terrorize Peter, but the two would at times reluctantly team up to take on even bigger bads, as despite being kind of a bad guy, Eddie had sort of a moral code. He definitely didn't like to kill innocent civilians and tried to avoid that when possible, though also he sometimes did that. The two teamed up to take on villains like Carnage, and eventually Eddie would become a hero in his own right. He's probably got one of the best story arcs in comics because of his gradual transformation since his introduction as Venom in '88, from complete villain to, well, complete anti-hero. Maybe even like full-on hero now. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Venom a full hero yet? Can we go there? Number 9. Helena Wayne as Huntress. Before Helena Bertinelli was Huntress, we had Helena Wayne. Helena Wayne was the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, Batman and Catwoman respectively. Although she didn't come from a crime family, she was still heavily trained by her parents, and eventually took up the mantle Huntress as a vigilante. Like the main continuity Huntress, she was also known for being more violent than was considered acceptable. After her mother's death, she moved out, and blaming the criminal Silky Cernak for her mother's death, as he had blackmailed Selina into returning to a life of crime as Catwoman, Helena Wayne set out for revenge. Catwoman died when she returned to her life of crime. No. Mom, why? Number 8. John Constantine. Constantine made his first appearance in Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 37. He is known as an occult detective from England who likes to do things his own way. He's somewhat violent and reckless, with somewhat of a disregard for the smaller things. To John, sometimes you have to break a few eggs or sacrifice a few souls to make an omelet. And as long as it's for the greater good, he's sometimes fine with that. In his own series Hellblazer, which started in 1988 and ran for over 300 issues, the original tone of the series was quite dark, because the series also came out as part of DC's Vertigo line, which was known for being one of the darkest imprints that DC ever had. Of course, sadly, Vertigo is no more, but in its place we now have the stunning DC Black Label, so I guess it's fine. Just kidding. DC Black Label's really awesome. But still, can't we have both? Can't we have both DC? Number 7. V. V comes to us from Alan Moore and David Lloyd's series V for Vendetta. He's a mysterious character who is also known as Patient Number 5, who's said to be one of the many victims of abuse in a resettlement camp run by the fascist and villainous Norsefire-ruled government. It is believed that V was a test subject at the camp who escaped. He then adopted the mantle V and began to work on building an anarchistic uprising to topple the oppressive regime. His methods were meant to appear morally ambiguous so that readers could decide how to see him, as a hero or as a madman. V made his first appearance in the series Warrior in issue number 1. Also, if you haven't checked out that little story that he's in Warrior, V for Vendetta, it's really great. Just saying. Also, the series is great. Number 6. Black Cat. Black Cat was first introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 issue 194 as a thief, and she continued to be that for quite a while. But she was also introduced as a love interest for Spider-Man at the same time, which she would also continue to be for some time. Distracting Spidey with a kiss, she was able to get away with the goods she needed and succeeded in breaking her dad out of jail as a result. Though we wouldn't learn her dad's connection to her until the next issue. Being a mysterious figure with self-serving motives has always left her painted as an anti-hero, even when she has heroic intentions at heart. Although Felicia Hardy has played both sides before as well, being a full-on hero and a full-on criminal at times. Number 5. Punisher. Probably one of the most iconic when it comes to the idea of what an anti-hero is. Frank Castle was also one of the first. It's likely because of him as well that the idea of seeking revenge became a somewhat dark one. The Punisher's main quest is to get vengeance, not just for himself, but for others whom he thinks deserve it. Originally, he turned to a life of vigilantism after the death of his family, who happened to be on a picnic at the wrong place, the wrong time, and were witnesses to something they shouldn't have been. As such, they were eliminated by the mob. Despite also being shot, Frank survived the attack, though the rest of his family died, and as a result, he swore revenge. He is also known for being an overly violent hero who fights with guns, which is something most heroes look down upon, preferring to use non-lethal force. The Punisher would achieve next-level anti-hero status when he also became the first anti-hero to kill the entire Marvel Universe in 1995, in Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, paving the way for another popular anti-hero, Deadpool, to also do so years later. Of course, it would take Deadpool until the 2000s before that would even be a thing for him. The 2010s, as it were, actually. Number 4. Wolverine. Logan, being considered a little more rough around the edges and animalistic, is what quickly granted him an anti-hero status. As far as superheroes go, he was different. He made his first full appearance in The Incredible Hulk Volume 1 issue 181. Since the beginning, his violent nature and broodiness has made him both well loved by fans, but sometimes disliked by other heroes. He also has less hang-ups when it comes to killing people, even suggesting at times that it's the best course of action when dealing with villains, and having a pretty big thing for mercy killing when it comes to other heroes. This has also made Logan one of the biggest anti-heroes in the X-Men world. He just kills tons of people. People will be like, I think I'm gonna die, and he's like, I got you, don't worry. I'll make it quick. Number 3. Magneto. Magneto has been known as the foil to X-Men's Professor Xavier for years. Xavier was also the leader of the X-Men, while Magneto was the leader of the first Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who were often the X-Men's enemies. Still, Magneto does what he does often to make the life of mutants better, albeit through punishing humanity, which, you know, not so great. And while he has spent a lot of time being a villain, over the years he has definitely shifted more to anti-hero, especially in the new Dawn of X Mutant relaunch, where he often works alongside Charles. Although Charles is always like, calm down, man. And he's like, no! I will slightly overreact, because I'm Magneto, and that's what I do. Number 2. Catwoman. Catwoman has always operated more on the edge of what's right and wrong since her introduction, which is part of the huge appeal when it comes to her, and has been part of a huge problem in regards to her on and off again relationship with Batman. Though Batman wasn't really a saint either when it came to his early days, but anyways. When Catwoman first appeared in Batman Volume 1 issue number 1, it was as a jewel thief, and Batman at the time was engaged to a woman named Julie. Still, he was tempted to join her and become her king of crime, but when he refused her, she managed to escape his clutches, sneaking away. Batman really hoped that he'd run into her again despite her criminal tendencies, and despite the fact that he was engaged, and his wish would eventually be granted. Catwoman would even team up with Batman and join him in his acts of heroism, though originally it would often be for her own motives alone, but she became more of a hero as time went on. Number 1. Namor. Namor is an interesting one. When he first debuted in Motion Picture Funnies Weekly, it was as a young prince attacking land dwellers, seeking revenge for his people. He would then go on to join the fight in World War II, fighting against Nazis with heroes such as Captain America. Later, he would forget who he was and only regain his memories when he was accidentally knocked into the ocean in the original Fantastic Four series by Johnny Storm. He would then rediscover who he was, and that the kingdom that had been his underwater home had been destroyed by the Humans War's nuclear bomb tests, and as a result would attack the land, becoming a villain. Again. Since then, he has done a variety of good and not always so good things, but what remains constant is that Namor's methods have pretty much always been questionable. His return to being good, but in his own way, and still while thinking very highly of himself, made him an anti-hero. And while he is very passionate about protecting his people, there is no doubt that this means he would also do anything to safeguard Atlantis, regardless of how morally ambiguous or severe it might be.